the older one gets, the more one looks back and finds them oneself sort of interested in history. So hence I'm going towards older and older maps. So here's a tale of maps and aerial photography of forests and cosmic radiation. And because I only have 20 minutes, this will be a rather fast one. So why is one interested? Well, we do want to know future erosion rates, because that house on the cliff, when will it go? Now, our certainty of understanding is illustrated by these arrows. And I think someone has still their microphone on, because I can still hear some clanking in the background. And the arrows represent certainty. So in the present, so in the recent past, or the last 100 years, we have quite a good understanding of past erosion rates. And you could just sort of linearly extrapolate into the future. So you do have high certainty probably about the next 10, 20, 30 years. But going forward, the question of when this will happen depends on how far this is away, but the uncertainty sort of increases dramatically and the certainty decreases, as this illustrates. So 20 years ago, and well, it's astonishing that this is sort of a long time ago, a comparison was made between the historic maps then available and the latest aerial photography from 2001 that predates the coastal monitoring program, actually, in the southeast. But those were auto-rectified. First ones, I think, that were auto-rectified, and you could digitize the cliff line from them. And this table basically shows that for each of the epochs used by maps and historical photography, and historical photography covers the 1973 photos and the 2001 photos, that if you take the entire 100 and nearly 30 years, and you take the average of that, and then you look at what the proportion 1973 to 2001, so the last 30 years was, then there was a significant reduction in the cliff retreat rate all along the East Sussex coastline. And there were good arguments made in the paper as to why this might be the case. Now, 20 years on, we're still looking at maps, and this is the first Ordnance Survey map from the 1860s and 1870s, and that's probably where most people sort of stand still, because you can't go backwards in time easily. Because if you do, you end up with sort of charcoal drawings that are not easy to measure from. This is 1757, and then you have the Budgeon's map of Sussex, and again, so it's more artistic than anything else. So when someone suggested to me, "Ooh, I found a map from 1624 of the Manor of Sandor Sutton," which I didn't know where it is, but it is Seaford Head, I was rather dubious. But that person had just used crude methods of rectifying it and thought it was actually quite good. So I found nearly 30 points on that map that you can find today. And the RMS value of the error is 16 meters, which is absolutely staggering given whatever issues there might be with this map. And so the funny thing is, it is the first map that seems to be covering parts of the coast, and that's highlighted by the red line. And the good thing is at Seaford Head, there is actually a natural feature that hasn't changed over time, and which was mapped in 1624 as well. So this is what the 1624 map looks, and you think, ooh, it's just field boundaries, and oh, I don't really know. But you can see there is let me no. If I do my laser pointer, you can see here there's actually a road or a path, whatever it was in 1624. And if you overlay that with the OS mapping, then this is the path and the road. And so you see, oh, there are actually features that have translated through history in the landscape. So this map shows just sort of the section of the coast. So this is basically the coastline here. And this is the fossil cliff that goes into Seaford. And the green and red crosses are sort of the points that were used for the rectification. And those white highlighted ones were used for a specific rectification, just trying to get it on the coast a little bit better. And this is what you come up with. So the background is the map rectified with the 4 control points. The black line, thin black line, is with the 28 control points. And then you have the 1872 cliff line in white and the LiDAR features of this bit here, which is a Bronze Age hill fort, basically. So it's just an embankment going round. And you can see that the shape fits really, really well. Likewise, the fossil cliff up here is actually quite good. What is unknown with the map is, for example, whether they did take into account in the surveying the change in elevation, so the slope angle, because that probably makes a difference on the Seaford Head. So what you can see is that the cliff retreat has not been a lot in most places. There's also a map from 1764, which covers the eastern side of Seaford Head. And it's a bit nicer colored, but again, you can see sort of common features. This is a LiDAR, sort of the slope area, and that fits with that one. The footpath from the 1770s map fits quite well, but that valley is completely wrong, and I don't know why that is the case. But there is the head of a little valley, which you can still see today, which is in the map and allows again to have a point, a fixed point, where you know this is actually the same point today as it was in 1764. So if you update this map, and I'll skip this one, and you calculate the retreat rates for different sections, 50-meter long sections along that Seaford Head frontage, and for different time periods, you see that for the western part of Seaford Head, where the 1624 map is available, and for the other one, for the eastern one, the retreat rate, the annual retreat rate, is a lot less than it was at the height of the start of the 20th century. And the pattern that has been in the past, sort of, it decreases as we go into the present. So that's quite a good one. So it would suggest that cliff retreat actually was fairly negligible in the past, and has increased towards the Victorian times, and since then has decreased again. So, but can we update this into the future as well? Because this decrease might just be a blip in time. So this shows the 2001 orthophoto and the 2020, 1999, and 1973 cliff lines. And these were redone because you should never trust someone else's processing. So fortunately for the 2020 aerial photography, we did get the, after asking and begging a little bit probably, we got the original photographs. And probably several years ago, I gave a presentation here as to what you can do with this drone software, and you can use it to rectify and auto-rectify aerial photography. And this is what was done here. Sort of the 1973, 99, and 2020 photos were properly geo-auto-rectified, and so you have a proper, reliable comparison. And so this is where the 2020 data comes from. So if I extend now, this was 2020 data, you see that 1973 to 1999 is the drop that we first saw, and this drop continues into the last 20 years. Now, I also did this for the rest of the coast, and you can see the same pattern. So we had, again, for Seaford Head, it's the same graph here, but for the others, the peak of cliff erosion was about, well, sometimes at the beginning of the 20th century, probably, because there's a large gap between the early 20th century and 1973. But it shows for everywhere that the last 20 years were actually less erosive than the previous ones. And I also did this, it's just a slightly different color scheme because it was for a project actually for the short bit of cliffs that are still exposed at Salting to New Haven. So cliff retreat continues to be slowing down in East Sussex. So now we are going even further back in time. Forests. You probably know the fossil forest down at Cliff End, but there are reports of other forests, and these are from the 19th century, where one was reported at Bognor, one at Pevensey, and they have all disappeared by now. I can remember in 2000 having seen sort of a tiny little feature at Bexhill, but even that has gone. We also know that in the past, the cliff lines have been somewhere completely different, especially this is highlighted at Dungeness. We know that in the early Holocene, this is the present cliff line here, or coastline, that Hastings Bank was actually a shingle barrier that rolled gradually back. And we do know that the entire Dungeness complex basically started to accumulate from 4,000, 5,000 years ago. And even since the medieval times, you can see there's lots and lots of shingle arrived in Rye Bay and filled in Rye Bay. So what does this tell us about cliff retreat? Well, at Cliff End in Hastings, east of Hastings, Pett Level, you go back to the 1873 map, and you see the military canal, which was built in the 1830s. And when you go and onto the foreshore or even look at the aerial photography, you see all these purple dots here, and these are tree trunks, 5,000-year-old oak forest. And that overlaps with the cliff for quite a long section. That's nearly a kilometer where this overlaps. The star here highlights where there's an example of this shown. It also shows that the cliff was retreating and active in 1873, but this bit was inactive. So this was the fossil cliff, protected by a large shingle barrier that overlay that fossil forest. So the fossil forest must have developed when the beach was even further out at sea. And if that was the case at Hastings, well, that probably was the case everywhere else along the Sussex coastline, because that's where all the shingle that ended up at Rye Bay came from. So to illustrate this in a cross profile a bit better, from the 1873 map, you can interpolate sort of a profile based on knowledge. There's a contour line here, for example, a contour line there, and the elevations of the channel and some assumptions about the beach. So this is probably what the beach or the profile looked in 1873. By 78, it had actually started to retreat, and it is retreating now quite rapidly. But you can see down here, these are the fossil forest bits that are underlying the whole thing. So this ties in very nicely with this sort of slope deposit in front of the cliff from 120,000 years ago, in front of which the fossil forest developed, and then very far out here was probably a shingle barrier. So it looked probably a bit like that, with lovely oak forests in front of the very, very smooth slope. Looking back in time, there's also the cosmogenic radiation method that is now tried and used in various places. And it was used at East Sussex, at Seaford Head, surprisingly, and Beachy Head. And it basically works on the assumption that cosmogenic radiation hits the Earth, changes some of the elements, and the concentration of these elements is a representation of when the surface was exposed. And you can see this here, sort of as a diagram of it, with lots and lots of different assumptions, because the water shields the radiation, the shore platform is eroding, but essentially it should allow you to trace the development of the cliff retreat, i.e. the exposure of the underlying shore platform. And that work back in 2016 came to the conclusion that cliff retreat was slow for much of the Holocene, in contrast to substantially higher observed retreat rates now. So previously a relatively stable, slowly eroding coastline has undergone recent increase in its rates of cliff retreat. Now, my contention now is that it hasn't actually eroded at all prior to a few hundred years ago. And that is based on the data at Fairlight, but also the reports of vast beaches in the Middle Ages in front of Brighton, for example, which all have gingerly made their way eastwards and accumulated in Rye Bay. So, in conclusion, cliffs did not retreat up to a few hundred years ago due to the presence of extensive shingle barriers well seawards of these cliffs, and the terrestrial habitats that were present everywhere, basically, in the form of the fossil forests in front of the present coastline. Beaches disappeared through longshore transport, and that's when they started to be exposed to cliff erosion, which first started in the west and reached cliff end just sort of, well, in the last 100 years, because it was at the end of the conveyor belt, and therefore was shingle coming along and along and along, and it just happened to run out at that time. And the peak of the retreat rate a century or so ago is due to a specific beach volume in front of the cliffs that accelerates abrasion and erosion, and that was demonstrated in the paper on seawall abrasion. So with further loss of beach material, i.e. there's still longshore transport going on and the beaches are getting smaller and smaller in front of the cliffs, erosion is likely to slow down even further. Additionally, we have far less frost days. I mean, back in the 1870s, we were in the middle of the Little Ice Age, and it was quite frosty, but there aren't any frost dates anymore that could attack the cliffs. But going back to the very first point, how do we know where the cliff will be at a point in the future? For the Sussex Cliffs, average historic erosion rates do not provide a reliable data set from which to extrapolate future erosion. And to add to this, because there will be a publication of future cliff retreat under sea level rise coming up by the Environment Agency in the next few months, this doesn't really work very well to calibrate models, or the models need to include a lot of factors to be able to extrapolate into the future when the cliff erosion will occur and when a certain property is likely to fall into the sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uwe. I think it's now follow that, and this is the hobby for you. It's a well received applause there from everyone. I think brilliantly done. I can't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to immediately go on and hope that Dominique can load up the presentation. Oh, good. Yep. Yeah. And I'll introduce Dominique Townsend, a fresh look at the UK's most closely monitored beach. Over to you, Dominique.
Thank you, Brian. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes,
Yep.
thank you.
And you can hear me, super.
Yep.
So hi, my name's Dominique Townsend. I'm a PhD student at the University of Southampton. And I'll be talking to you about some of the really exciting research that's going on at Pevensey Bay in East Sussex, the UK's most closely monitored beach. So I'd just like to start by giving you a bit of background on Pevensey Bay itself. The beach, which is roughly 9 kilometres in length, is actively managed as a flood barrier, and it protects the low-lying hinterland from tidal inundation. This work is carried out by Pevensey Coastal Defence Limited, who have a 25-year contract with the Environment Agency to maintain continuous protection of the open beach, maintaining the beach volume so that they're large enough to withstand a 1 in 400-year breach event. And the beach protects a sort of 50 square kilometre area containing around 10,000 properties and both internationally and nationally important heritage monuments and wildlife. So how did Pevensey become the UK's most closely monitored beach? Well, in addition to the sort of 2 surveys per year carried out by Worthing Borough Council as part of the Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme, they also have monthly surveys, which are used to inform their beach management works, which essentially are ongoing constantly from September to May. And then they also have an independent profile survey carried out once a year to check against their sort of key performance indicators, so looking at beach width and beach volume. So with 15 surveys a year and 18 years since the monitoring began, this is what the number of surveys carried out looks like. So each quad bike or total station represents a survey carried out of Pevensey in the last 18 years, with those carried out by the RCMP coloured orange, which also represents the sort of the number of beaches most beaches hold. And yeah, it's not quite the most surveyed beach in the world. That title goes to Duck in North Carolina, which is close to 1,000 surveys, as their bi-monthly monitoring programme started in 1981. So what have we learned from this wealth of data? Well, what it does show us is that actually PCDL have been doing a really great job at maintaining the upper part of the beach volume. However, it's also shown us that the lower beach, which is predominantly sand, is slowly disappearing over time. And the graph here shows the total beach volume, so everything above minus 2.5 metres ordnance datum from 2003 to 2016. And the sort of term we use to describe this is foreshore lowering. We know that this isn't an isolated phenomena and is also happening elsewhere across the world and in the UK, both from anecdotal evidence and from wider studies such as sort of Taylor et al.'s work on the right-hand side here, which is comparing retreat rates of high and low water marks. However, there are several things that this data doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us where the sand is going. It doesn't tell us if this is a permanent change or if it's part of a cyclical cycle. It doesn't tell us what's driving the change. And we also need to ask ourselves, is managing the beach in this way sustainable, or is it contributing to this loss of foreshore? So to answer these questions, we need to understand what's happening below the waterline. Otherwise, we're only really looking at part of the picture. So when you have lots of big questions like this, of course, it's a fantastic opportunity for research. And so in 2018, PCDL, the Environment Agency, the Channel Coastal Observatory and the University of Southampton got together to create a research proposal investigating these issues. And to do this work, funding was provided for a PhD studentship, a postdoctoral fellowship, and 3 methods of shore-face surveys. In addition to the problems observed with the foreshore lowering, the project also offered the opportunity to explore mixed composite beaches below the waterline, as there's currently very little research in this area. So Our overall project objective is to essentially advance the understanding of how the shore face of mixed sediment beaches behave. So unlike the existing monitoring data, which focuses on the upper part of the beach, we're going to be looking at all of it right down to the point where coastal processes sort of no longer affect the seabed. And we're going to be doing this by following a set of scientific stepwise objectives, whereby firstly, we're going to need to understand the hydrodynamics across the site. Secondly, we're going to learn how the shore face bathymetry is changing over time. And then once we have both of these bits of understanding, we can start picking out sediment transport pathways. And finally, this will all link together to sort of create a process-driven conceptual model, which in turn should explain the lowering mechanisms observed. So I'd just like to talk you through what data is being acquired through the project and the 3 methods used to capture it. So on the right-hand side here, you've got an image of the radar tower, which stands around 17 meters tall and covers a range of 6 kilometers at 40 by 40 meter resolution. So the radar images the sea surface every couple of seconds, and this data can be processed using an algorithm to derive the bathymetry, surface currents and wavelength every 15 minutes, and produce intertidal topography every 2 weeks using a waterline detection method. And one of the really exciting things about this sort of data capture method is that it actually works best during stormy conditions, which is previously when we've really not been able to see, because that's exactly when people don't want to go out in boats and survey the nearshore zone. So moving on to the next method, we have a benthic array, which measures wave parameters as well as suspended sediment content. It's made up of 8 stations positioned so that we can measure both hydrodynamic variations, not only in the cross shore, but also in the longshore direction. And finally, we've both undertaken and charted a series of additional bathymetry surveys, both across the bay and more frequently in a targeted location where the benthic array will be positioned. And these surveys are intended not only to be informative themselves, but they'll also be used to scrutinise the remotely sensed radar data, as well as provide important information on the seabed around the array area. And here's just some nice pictures of the uncrewed survey vessels that have carried out the targeted surveying. And in the centre, there's an image of some of the swath bathymetry that has been captured using these vessels. So I'd just like to finish by giving you an example of how some of this data is being used. So as part of my thesis, I've been examining the concept of the depth of closure, which is the point that no seasonal change in the seabed occurs. This point can be used as a lower boundary for sediment budgets, but it can also be used in beach nourishment programmes on sandy beaches. You can see on the right-hand image some of the existing methods to use to determine the depth of closure shown as contours. And I think without knowing too much about it, you can see there's quite a lot of variation in the results, and also that the seabed bathymetry is complex. And to illustrate this further, the image on the bottom left shows 3 bathymetry survey profiles along the bed type, which you can see is also not consistent throughout the profile. So I think we really need to have a think about whether the existing methods are fit for purpose for more complex sites such as this one. So I'm currently taking a more exploratory delve into the radar data to try and figure out if there's a better way to measure the point of no change. And if you look on the left, one of the ways in which I'm doing this is taking a slice through time along a profile to try and see if I can create a more probabilistic approach rather than the sort of hard engineering line in the sand approach we saw on the previous slide. I'm also looking into one of the outputs from the radar, which is currently used in the QC process, which gives us information on how much interaction the waves and bed are experiencing. And I'm afraid this isn't a great diagram, but the colour bar on the right-hand side shows depth saturation, where 0% would indicate there's a high level of wave bed interaction, whereas 100% would mean that no waves are interacting with the bed. And you might be thinking at this point, what has this got to do with foreshore lowering? Well, this is really the first step in sort of defining the area we're interested in before we can go on to map those changes and understand what's the driving force behind them. So sort of in summary, we've got good evidence that the foreshore is lowering at Pevensey Bay, as it is around many coasts, but we're yet to understand why this is happening. And the research project will hopefully shed some light on this issue using an array of different shore face survey methods. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. My email address is there, and I think Brian mentioned he'd pop it into the chat. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. I've got one quick question, and it relates to kelp. And I'm just wondering if the lower foreshore, or the extent of your work, if kelp were to grow in that, how would you compensate for it, or how would you measure its effects? Has that been considered? Because I'm not quite sure whether the kelp project extends as far as Pevensey or not, but it's just something to consider.
Yeah, I don't think the kelp project extends quite as far as Pevensey, because that's in East Sussex. But I think it would be quite interesting to see the differences, like if you could sort of track it over time, see how the kelp affects the sort of wave patterns.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thanks very much. Something to think about.
Yeah.
I was having a little bit of a panic here just a moment ago, because I couldn't actually get a link with Maritsa, and then I realised that this is a video, and Charlie and Poppy are going to control this, so I can't speak to somebody. So Charlie and Poppy, can you start the video on this one? This is Maritsa Harry, a comprehensive national coastal monitoring in Trinidad and Tobago.
Hopefully this works.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for the invitation to present today at the Annual Partners Meeting 2021. My name is Maritsa Harry. I am the Project Research Officer at the Coastal Protection Units, and today I'll be giving an overview of the Comprehensive National Coastal Monitoring Program. The Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, through its draft National Development Strategy, also known as Vision 2030, has linked the overarching goal of achieving developed nation status on 5 development pillars, one of which is valuing and enhancing the environment. According to this Vision 2030, the theme valuing and enhancing the environment has been made a separate development goal because of the burgeoning impact of climate change, as well as Trinidad and Tobago's adoption of the Global 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its commitments under various multilateral environmental agreements. So given our increased risk to climate change and associated hazards, in particular coastal erosion and coastal flooding, the CPU, or the Coastal Protection Unit of the Ministry of Works and Transport, has been charged with the mandate to implement the Critical Coastal Protection Program. The Critical Coastal Protection Program seeks to preserve and rehabilitate the shoreline by addressing the most crucial aspects of coastal erosion, shoreline instability, and flooding incidents. The map of Trinidad in the above shows the various projects being undertaken by the CPU. The Critical Coastal Protection Program has been challenged by a paucity of continuous and robust oceanographic data, and this paucity has challenged informed decision-making with regards to shoreline management. Previous consultants commissioned by the Government of Trinidad and Tobago recommended that without the existence of a comprehensive database that can bring together coastal data sets, policy decisions with respect to shoreline management would remain a non-coherent and fragmented process. The Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago took a strategic step toward depositing into this database by mapping a sustainable solution to combat the problem of coastal erosion and flooding. Thus, the CNCMP was born. This program supports the monitoring of the state of Trinidad and Tobago's coastal areas and serves as a central repository for coastal data. In essence, the CNCMP is a multi-pronged approach aimed at diagnosing, correcting, and cohering these coastal components in order to enable the most informed decision-making for future sustainable shoreline management. In order to fully comprehend and improve shoreline management, a diagnostic lens had to be put over all the components of existing coastal management structure as shown in the diagram, and some of which we will discuss further along. CNCMP operates with the basis that shoreline management process should be data-driven, coherent, and holistic. The Comprehensive National Coastal Monitoring Program consists of 3 phases. The first phase involves the establishment of a framework for the CNCMP, which is currently being conducted and it's at its final stages. This began in January of 2019. The second phase is the implementation of the CNCMP, which was established from the first phase, and the third phase is the transitioning and sustainment phase, so that the CNCMP can operate beyond the first 2-year implementation. So the aims and objectives of the CNCMP are as follows: to assist coastal managers by providing relevant information on which to make sustainable future shoreline management decisions, to assist in defining the magnitude of risks of coastal erosion and coastal flooding, to provide data to support continuous evaluation of the risks of coastal erosion and coastal flooding, and to improve understanding of coastal processes and how those processes interact with the shoreline. In addition to these aims and objectives, the CNCMP will also serve to gather information in a holistic manner rather than a piecemeal and reactionary approach to coastal management issues. So in the diagram, it shows that the phase 1 of CNCMP is further broken down into 3 stages. Stage 1 being the data needs assessment and analysis, stage 2, strategy and framework for the CNCMP, and stage 3, which is the program roadmap and implementation plan, which is where we are currently at. Phase 1 of the CNCMP is split into 3 stages: the data needs assessment and analysis, the strategy and framework for the CNCMP, and the program roadmap and action plan. The major components of each stage are highlighted in yellow and will be briefly presented. The National Coastal Assessment, Coastal Social Survey, and Stakeholder Engagement Strategy are phase 1. Then we have in stage 2 the establishment of the CIMS, or the Coastal Information Management System, and then stage 3 being the Pilot Coastal Monitoring Initiative. The first step of the CNCMP involved gaining an understanding of the current status of the coastal zone and the current monitoring procedures in place. The NCA compiled and analyzed existing information to provide a rapid, comprehensive overview of the current situation of the coast, while identifying shortcomings and gaps in information required to support management decisions. Physical, biological, and socio-economic characteristics and climate change impacts were reported for Trinidad and Tobago. Information and datasets for the NCA were gathered through key stakeholders through a series of extensive consultations with various government agencies. The NCA comprised of an assessment of the current state of the coastal area in Trinidad and Tobago, an assessment of impacts on the coastal area caused by existing and future coastal developments, vulnerability and risk classification of the coast in relation to coastal erosion and coastal flooding. It provided a delineation of the coastline into management units, and it identified and mapped coastal hotspots and watspots. But for the sake of time, I will just expand on 2 of these assessments, the vulnerability classification and the hotspots and watspots. This is a map of Trinidad on the left and Tobago on the right. Vulnerable areas of the coastline were identified in the NCA using a coastal vulnerability index, which incorporated 6 physical variables. These included geomorphology, coastal slope, relative sea level change, shoreline erosion and accretion rates, tidal range, and mean significant wave height. The shoreline was separated into 1,000-meter grid cells, and each variable was ranked from 1 to 5 based on its potential influence on coastal changes in each grid cell. So in the map shown, very low vulnerability areas are indicated by the green squares, and very high vulnerability areas are indicated by the red squares. The findings of the NCA, along with the data collected, help guide management decisions regarding the hotspots, watspots, and overall coastal zone. So coastal hotspots refer to areas where coastal erosion has threatened shoreline development or assets that are at risk in the short term, while coastal watspots are those that will become threatened in the longer term. Hotspots and watspots were categorized in the NCA based on CVI ranking and erosion that was indicated by the shoreline difference between 1994 and 2014. After this initial identification, the categories were finalized by manual assessment. In Trinidad, a total of 460 grid cells were considered, with 65 hotspots and 58 watspots identified. In Tobago, a total of 110 grid locations were considered, with 11 hotspots and 25 watspots. The main reasons for coastal erosion risk in Trinidad and Tobago, based on this analysis, were the instability of coastal areas due to its geology, increased exposure to wave energy, alteration of sediment transport as a result of activities such as dredging, and improper placement of coastal structures, which result in downdrift erosion. Again, because the CNCMP is undertaken with the basis that shoreline management must be holistic, it was imperative to include a study on the social aspect of shoreline management. This is because a whopping 70% of the population in Trinidad and Tobago live on the coastline. So it was crucial to get an understanding of how persons' perceptions, attitudes, and values of the coast play a role into the health and state of the coastline. The data collected via the Coastal Social Survey was needed to effectively and efficiently collect data that serve design and management decision needs under the Critical Coastal Protection Program, to reduce the frequency and severity of coastal erosion and inundation, thereby reducing the risk to lives and preventing damage to public and private properties and infrastructure. It also was needed to obtain data for analysis and design of coastal protection schemes at critical areas of coastal inundation and erosion. The areas in which the Coastal Social Survey were conducted were based on results from the National Coastal Assessment, or the NCA, which identified high priority sites. Over a 2-week period in October 2019, 17 surveyors visited close to 100 communities in 15 municipalities, including Port of Spain, San Fernando, Mayaro, Sangre Grande, and Tobago, to conduct face-to-face interviews with questionnaires. There were 486 participants in total. 85% of the respondents indicated they lived within 20 minutes walking distance to the coast. With respect to value of the coastal communities, of the 486 persons who indicated how important the coastal area was to their daily life, 88% in total indicated that it was either very important or important. Results showed the participants were eager to share their issues and experiences and participate in engagement activities. They expressed a lack of ongoing maintenance, monitoring of initiatives, and enforcement of laws and regulations, and they were unsure of the agencies responsible for coastal protection and their role in the process. The participants believe local television and social media were the most effective means of increasing awareness. Another deliverable of Stage 1 of the CNCMP included the Stakeholder Engagement Strategy, or the SEP, and this was done to create a process that provided opportunities for stakeholders to express their views and concerns and allowed the CPU to consider and respond to them. This was a multifaceted plan, with one of the many goals being to educate and raise the awareness of the public about issues surrounding coastal erosion and flooding and climate change. Specific attention was paid to the trends and impacts of the current critical state of the coastline, the vision for the future coastline, and the need for coastal management guided by a coastal policy. So there were many tools used to carry out the objectives of the Stakeholder Engagement Plan. One example of how this was achieved was the Integrated Water Resources and Coastal Symposium held in March of this year. Another was through a national school tour and an intended national schools competition to be known as Coastal Tales. Between February and March of 2020, over 30 primary and secondary schools that were part of the vulnerable coastal communities were visited as part of the national school tour. Due to the variation in targeted audiences, 2 separate competitions were established, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a postponement in the execution of the competitions. The school tours were successful at engaging the youth and educating them on the importance of the coastal zone and raising awareness of the state of the coastlines. Another deliverable, the Coastal Information Management Systems, is one of the most important deliverables of the CNCMP. It is an integral part of the CNCMP as this system provides greater accessibility of data to multiple users through a web-based interface. As such, it can potentially be used as a hub for sharing data across departments and organizations. End users will be able to retrieve coastal data, which in turn will help them in their studies, research, and knowledge. From an institutional standpoint, the CIMS will greatly improve research and analysis, which in turn will improve decision-making as existing and new data will be easily accessible and vetted before it is inputted into the system. It will create coherency and promote unison among the Ministry of Works and Transport and other agencies tasked with coastal management. The CIMS aims to act as a database framework for the Phase 2 of the CNCMP to support current needs for storage, sharing, and reporting of coastal data, to contain relevant data for coastal management interventions and screening of coastal conditions, to retrieve, store, and display data from ongoing coastal monitoring schemes and integrate future data sets, and to support multiple users, including multiple data providers to the system. It will thus function to support CPU and other stakeholders in its decision-making and planning for an efficient and more effective coastal management in Trinidad and Tobago. In order to test, implement, and validate the strategy and framework presented in the previous stages of the CNCMP, pilot sites for monitoring were recommended. The purpose of pilot sites is to represent the operation of the CNCMP on a smaller scale before its implementation in the later phases as a nationwide initiative. Several sites were considered as prospective locations for the pilot study. These sites were selected because of ongoing coastal issues and the range of aspects that are relevant to coastal management. 2 sites were chosen. Celebia was chosen because of its use as a recreational beach and its many coastal features, such as a wide river which contributes sediment into the system. Rockley Bay in Tobago was chosen as this site is undergoing extreme erosion with damage to a major access road into the capital, Scarborough. This is a map of Celebia Bay in the east coast of Trinidad. It shows the UAV survey area and the bathymetry survey area, as well as it shows the location of the weather and base stations. Data sets collected at Celebia Bay on the east coast of Trinidad included waves and current data, river discharge, drone imagery, beach profiles, bathymetry, and tides. The Pilot Coastal Monitoring Initiative, which is a deliverable of Stage 3 of the CNCMP, provides essential information necessary to develop an understanding of coastal processes within the chosen study sites. The pictures shown represent aerial survey, beach profiling, tide gauge installation, and bathymetry at Little Rockley Bay and Rockley Bay. Data collected from these surveys were analyzed and presented graphically. The second photo at the top from the left, for example, shows the ocean current speed and direction displayed as the current rose at Rockley Bay. Currents flowed predominantly towards the southwest. The graph on the right-hand side shows the river profile at Celebia Bay at the bridge location. River discharge was then calculated from a cross-sectional area of the river profile. The CNCMP serves many purposes in addition to coastal erosion and hazards.
Looks like we've had a slight hiccup in the sound there. Poppy, I think you might have to unmute yourself again. It seems you've been muted.
providing assurance that coastal management and planning is informed by real data. Understanding coastal processes also provides a basis for establishing legal instruments to protect our vulnerable coastal zone. The benefit of long-term data collection cannot be underestimated, forming the basis for coastal protection works and ensuring safety in the coastal environments. The benefits of coastal monitoring far exceeds the cost, providing assurance that our valued coastal resources are sustained into the future. Our coasts are vital in providing food, shelter, transport, recreation, tourism, and inspiration, to name a few. People's livelihoods depend on its sustainability, and it needs to be protected. As such, we must first understand the processes taking place in the coastal zone and how we interact with it. The CNCMP's main aim is to provide the way we manage our coastal zone. Looking at the bigger picture, this program is necessary to allow us to live sustainably within an extremely vulnerable region. It is our national and patriotic responsibility as the CPU to protect our coastal areas for the future. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. If you would like to contact us at the CPU, you can call us at 1-868-623-6797, or you can email me at mharry@mowt.gov.tt. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say I can't thank her because she's not there. But that was, the ripples of the work that we've been doing seem to have spread a long, long way. I think you'll all agree. If there are any questions, if you put them in the chat, I can see that there are still some other questions that are raging backwards and forwards on Uwe's presentation. But if there are any other questions, if you put them in the chat, we'll capture them afterwards, and then we'll send them on to Maritsa. In the meantime, I'd like to invite Sacha Neill to give us an update and a presentation on the Hurst Spit tracer study.
Thank you, Brian. Right, I'll see if I can now share my screen. There you go. So hopefully you can all see my presentation.
At the moment, I've got a black screen.
Ah, let's try again.
I'm seeing it, Sacha. It might just be a bit.
Okay, we'll go again and give you a shot. There we go. Any better?
Yeah.
No, it may be me. I may have caught David Losley's gremlins.
Okay, well, I'll carry on and hopefully you can tag in and see it as well. So thank you very much. My name is Sacha Neill and I work as a coastal scientist in the research team for Coastal Partners. And today I'm just going to talk through some of the results that we've collected from a tracer study that was carried out along Hurst Spit between 2019 and 2021. So the objectives of the study were essentially to prepare, deploy and track over 1,000 tracer pebbles that were deployed at 10 different sites along the Hurst Spit frontage. We would use these results to help infer sediment drift rates and directions along the open beach face and the spit itself. And the idea was that these results would support future understanding of the transport links between Milford-on-Sea and Hurst Spit. This information will be fed into the design of future beach management schemes, which could be implemented under a new Hurst Spit beach management plan. So for those of you who don't know, Hurst Spit is a natural shingle spit feature located to the west of the Solent. The spit is about 1.5 miles in length and it's located between Milford-on-Sea and Keyhaven. And we've also got the castle feature, which sits at the promontory end of the spit, which many of you I'm sure are aware unfortunately suffered from a partial collapse earlier this year due to significant beach lowering around the front of the castle. So the study was focused around the current understanding of sediment transport links So this map is taken from the Scopac sediment transport study carried out in 2012. And you can see that the spit is mainly fed from a feeder material that comes from the western side of Christchurch Bay. So as we get further down into the spit itself, we know that the transport direction and sediment feed is still predominantly eastwards along the spit, but there are a number of uncertainties that remain, particularly around the interaction of sediment feed with the coastal features such as the groins and revetments, and also the links between the onshore and offshore feed to the frontage. So this in mind, the spit is it's highly managed at the moment. There's a number of different methods of management along the spit itself, and this ranges from sort of wooden groins and sea walls at Milford, which is further outside the image here. We've got a number of rock revetments and offshore breakwaters and groins along the spit face itself. We've got reinforcements around the castle, and again that includes rock revetments and groins. There's also some periodic import and recycling that occurs along the spit itself, and all of this works to keep the spit as stable as possible. However, we do see changes along the spit, so I'm sure you're all aware it is highly dynamic and extremely variable. This is a photo that was taken from one of the surveys carried out in 2020. This is sort of halfway along the main spit itself. This was the same location just a few days afterwards. So this is after a significant event which happened, and you can see sort of some dramatic reduction in the crest width at the top of the beach. There's also beach lowering and evidence of sort of overwashing over the face of the spit to the lee side. I must say that emergency works were carried out after this event, so there was some import and recycling going on to ensure the beach was brought back up to its optimum level. So a little bit about the tracer method itself. I'm sure many of you have sort of had the chance to hear about the method, but essentially it's a novel tracking method that was developed in-house, and it uses small radio frequency tags which are embedded into a range of different native pebbles collected from the site. So these pebbles are weighed, measured and catalogued, and they are then deployed at set locations along the beach frontage at an area of interest. We will then go along the site with specialised equipment. When this equipment becomes in range of a tag, the ID number and exact GPS location is automatically logged in the equipment to give us precise tracking locations of where these pebbles have moved to. So with this, we're able to collect some valuable information, which makes for some powerful images, such as this one here. This is a site down in Portsmouth. And you can see that each coloured dot corresponds to a pebble that was located at various surveys throughout the year. We also start layering up this data and the results with regional monitoring data. So here you can see topographic beach data. The areas in red showing where we've seen erosion over a particular period, and the areas in blue are where we've seen accretion. So when you start layering this data up together, it really makes some sort of powerful stories of what's going on in your area of interest. So for this study, we deployed 1,300 tracer pebbles, and these were deployed at the 10 different sites, which you can see here in the image on the right. The pebbles were deployed what was considered the active beach profile above mean high water neap, and they were located at the predetermined positions at the regional monitoring profiles. This was sort of to help us with analysis further on as we collected all of the data. So the initial survey programme was predicted to last for a year, so we'd have 12 months out on site. Unfortunately, we were delayed due to COVID halfway through this, which meant that the last few surveys carried out every couple of months were pushed back, and the total survey time ended up being around 16 months, which was good for us because it meant that we were collecting longer term data and sort of we could continue those trends further on. As I'm sure you're all aware, going out on site, you experience a lot. And Hurst itself is quite a wild environment at times. So we had storms, we had beautiful sunshine, but it was a great site to survey and a brilliant project. So I'll just run through an example of some of the results. I won't have time for all of the different sites, but here's just a few of the key sites that we had. So this is just a little animation of some of the results. This is down at Milford-on-Sea. You can see the black dotted line is where the pebbles were deployed initially. And then each coloured dot corresponds to a different survey day. And you can see the pebbles that were found on those surveys. And you can see quite nicely and quite easily how material is able to bypass these beach control structures, and also the revetment as well, as it makes its way down towards the main spit. So we start layering up data with the regional monitoring data. So here's the topographic data again, showing how we've had some significant erosion happening along this frontage. We can also layer it up with the profile data as well, taken from this profile line. So it starts to tell a really good story of what's going on. So not only are you seeing the changes, but you're seeing sort of possible reasons why and where these changes are occurring. So at the open beach, along the spit itself, again, we've got the deployment site along this dotted line. And you can see here how material sort of initially trapped within this embayment between the breakwater and the revetment. But once this bypasses, it's able to move on quite quickly down the open beach itself. And again, layering up the data to tell quite a nice story of what's going on. This is a site just round by the castle. This is quite a nice one because it shows how this sediment's moving off in almost like a pulse-like movement. So it'll accrete at this lobe end, and then once it's made its way around the lobe, it's able to travel up towards North Point itself. And interestingly, we weren't finding any pebbles on this side that were initially deployed to the west of the castle, which suggests that these transport links are sort of severely interrupted and material is not making its way around. And again, layering up with the regional monitoring data here. And this is a nice stockpile of material you can see ready to be reinforced in front of the castle. So we can also pull out individual pebble tracks from the data if we recover pebbles more than once. So this sort of highlights quite nicely any small scale drift reversals that you might see between survey dates themselves. So we've got the individual pebble tracks, and also we've got the centroid of the whole deployment itself. So with this data, we're able to pull out estimates of sediment transport rates and directions. So this graph here is just an example of some of the analysis that we carry out. So each bar corresponds to one of these deployment sites along the beach face. And you can see in this example that the blue positive values correspond to southeastward movements, so that's going down towards the end of the spit, and the orange bars correspond to northwest, so that's heading back up towards Milford. And interestingly, site H2 that has quite low net drift results, that's located around here, which is actually quite a vulnerable point of the spit, and it's where the breaching can occur, and also the reduction in crest widths, which is what we saw earlier. So at this site, we're also lucky to have the birthday buoy, the Milford wave buoy that was located just offshore. So we're able to pull out, again, some really nice data and hydrodynamic information. For us, it was quite interesting to pull out any of the significant sphere events that we saw and try and tie this into particularly individual pebble tracks that again showed those drift reversals that you can try and correlate into significant weather events. So we also have a record of retrieval rates. So this is an example of the retrieval rates from each site. And although it looks like rates drop off quite significantly, we do take this into account when we deploy initially. So we deploy enough pebbles earlier on that allows us to keep quite good results coming in, even 12 months after the survey starts. So it's important to note that these results are only a snapshot, so they only provide you information at what's happening at the time of each survey. We don't have any information on what's going on between each survey. Retrieval rates will fall the longer the studies are carried out, but again, we account for this in how many pebbles are deployed at the start of the surveys. And we do recommend that further research is carried out alongside these results. So this is where the regional monitoring data is really important for us, because again, it helps you to sort of build up those pictures and see quite clearly what's going on at each area. The tags that we insert into the pebbles don't have any battery power, which means that they can be left in the field for long periods of time, which is great. So we're going back down at sites in Portsmouth where studies were started in 2016 and we're still recovering pebbles, which helps build up a really long data set of information. We're able to detect the tags up to a metre below the beach surface, so even if we get beach burial, we're still recovering some of that information. And these results provide quite a clear and powerful visual communication aid. We found it's really good when trying to explain to members of the public what's going on, councillors, people pick it up and understand what's going on quite easily. And it is a direct measure of sediment movement, so it's been really good for us to understand sort of how effective beach management has been, and potentially what action could be taken in the future at different sites. So thank you for listening. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact us. We are actually looking at carrying out these studies at various different sites, particularly along the south coast. So we're currently setting up a site down in Dorset. So if you are interested in hearing any more of this method, or if you think it could help you, then please feel free to contact me or Coastal Partners. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Sacha. There are a number of questions for you already in the chat box. So if you'd like to have a go at addressing those, it'd be really handy. And thank you very much for keeping to time. I'd now like to introduce Lucinda Robinson and the MMO Marine Planning. Over to you, Lucinda.
Hi there. Yeah, I'll just share my screen. Can you guys see these slides and not my notes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Cheers. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucinda and I'm a marine planner within the MMO. I am the coastal planner for the Southeast area and I'm based in London. And today I'm going to talk to you about marine plans and marine planning. So first of all, a short introduction to the MMO. The MMO is a regulator for England seas, and we have 6 main services which are listed here. We are a non-departmental public body which sits under DEFRA. We license, regulate and plan marine activities in the seas around England so that they're carried out in a sustainable way. In addition to this, our responsibilities also include the managing of the English fishing fleet in respect to capacity and quota, the creation of and enforcement of marine conservation bylaws, and also being part of the initial response to marine emergencies. So what is marine planning and why do we need it? The marine area is becoming increasingly busy and there is need to manage the increasing competing need to use marine space and resources. The marine plans aim to guide both developers and decision makers to ensure that marine activities happen in a sustainable way. Fundamentally, the marine plans deliver change in the marine environment. The marine plans have been developed to provide policy guidance for each plan area to help manage the increasing demands on marine space and resources. The aim of the plans is to enable sustainable development of our seas. The plans will enable sustainable economic growth while also protecting the environment. So essentially, marine planning makes sure the right activities happen in the right place, at the right time and in the right way, in the marine area, placing sustainable development at the centre of all decisions. So English waters were divided into 11 marine plan areas, which are covered by 6 marine plans shown in this map. So the inshore marine plan area ranges from mean high water springs, or the tidal limit, out to 12 nautical miles, as you can see in these areas here around the coast. The offshore marine plan area ranges from 12 nautical miles to 200 nautical miles, or the territorial limit. However, the southeast, as you can see in the turquoise, is the only marine plan area that doesn't have an offshore marine plan, and this is due to its close boundary with the French marine area. The first plan to be adopted was the East Marine Plan in 2014. This was followed by the South Marine Plan in 2018, and the remaining plans were adopted this year and can be found on the marine planning section of the .gov website. With the adoption of all marine plans having been completed in 2021, for the first time we have a statutory integrated management planning framework to manage the use, protection and development of the whole of the English marine environment. So this is the general structure of the marine plan documents. You have the marine plan document, which contains the marine plan policies, a plan area vision and objectives. It is then supported by the technical annex. This contains detailed notes on each of the policies, including why the policy exists and what it aims to achieve, and how to implement or use the policy to aid decision making. This is then also supported by a sustainability appraisal and a habitats regulation assessment. As this graphic shows, the remit of terrestrial planning authorities extends down to mean low water springs, and the MMO's remit extends up to mean high water springs. This means that there is an overlap of the intertidal area where an applicant may need both marine planning permission and a marine licence. However, there are also a number of terrestrial developments or aspects of terrestrial developments that can impact on the marine area. These need to have regard to the marine area and in turn the marine plan policies. To work together in this overlap, the DEFRA have created the Coastal Concordat. The Coastal Concordat is a framework so that decision makers can coordinate processes from coastal development consents. The framework is designed to streamline process where multiple consents are required from multiple decision makers, saving applicants and decision maker time and resources. It is DEFRA's aim under the 25-year Environment Plan to have all coastal authorities signed up to the Coastal Concordat by 2021. So please do reach out to the email address on the slide to sign up if you're interested or want any more information. So I'll now move on to providing an overview of marine plan implementation. It is necessary for public authorities and decision makers to take account of marine plans, and it is a legal requirement for the marine plans to be considered in all decisions that affect England's marine area now and into the future. Decisions that take account of marine plans have a reduced risk of legal challenge as they are supported by the marine plans and thereby the legislation that supports the plans themselves. Marine plans provide a strategic approach to decision making, reduce the burden on applicants, and provide clarity by enabling proposals to move more quickly from concept to consent. And it applies and clarifies the national planning policy. Decisions will also be informed by the best available evidence and are considered against the wider context, both on land and at sea. If decisions take into account of marine plans, England's marine area will be managed sustainably, and time and money can be saved by all parties. Examples of plan implementation can be found on the .gov website, where there are detailed examples of plan use for an oyster restoration project and integration with a local plan. I would also like to highlight the Explore Marine Plans. So this is the MMO's mapping service, which can be used to find marine planning information for England, including data on marine licenses, environmental designations, and marine plan policy information from regional marine plans. The tool is a key component of marine planning and should be used alongside published marine plans. It is a multi-layered system which allows spatial identification of any proposed works and automatically scopes in all relevant marine plan policies. So within the Explore Marine Plans, you'll see two tabs. Firstly, the Map Data tab. This contains recently published marine activities data that can be turned on in the map to aid with implementation of marine plans. You also have the Marine Plan Policy tab, which provides a drawing tool function to view marine policy information in the area selected. Explore Marine Plans also contains contact details for marine planners and quick access for the marine plan documents, where each policy has detailed implementation guidance. So I recommend you visit our website if you're interested, and we've also developed a how-to guide on there as well for further information on how to use the service. So I'll now explain a bit more about monitoring and reporting process for marine plans. So the MMO has a legal requirement to monitor the marine plans under sections 54 and 61 of the Marine and Coastal Access Act. Monitoring of the implementation of marine plans informs the MMO how plans are being used and allows us to ensure the impacts of plan-led management on the English waters, and in particular, whether they're meeting targets of the high-level marine objectives. So the Northeast, Northwest, Southeast, and Southwest Marine Plans approach to monitoring document describes how the marine plans will be monitored, and in time will be supported by a separate annex of indicators that will set out detailed indicator descriptions, including quality assurance undertaken. This work is currently ongoing, and updates on this will be given into the future. Our marine plan monitoring includes also monitoring indicators, annual monitoring surveys, and case studies. So no more than 3 years after its adoption, the MMO produces a report for the consideration and agreement of the Secretary of State to lay before Parliament on the individual marine plan, and every 6 years, this report is on all the marine plans together. Reporting to Parliament includes the effects of policies, the effectiveness of policies in securing plan objectives, and progress towards regional objectives and the marine policy statement. We monitor the effectiveness of marine plan policies by using the data from the indicators. So the future steps of marine planning, looking into the future. We will continue to work hard to maintain our relationship with decision makers, engaging regularly to keep updated and involved in the marine planning process. We will continue to monitor the effectiveness of marine plan policies and the marine plans in achieving high-level marine objectives, and will shortly be developing the annex of indicators that will set out detailed indicator descriptions, including quality assurance undertaken. We are now planning how best practice for monitoring can be applied to all planned areas, and as always continue to search for and be sent new evidence for marine planning consideration. We continue to encourage a more strategic approach to marine planning, particularly around the development of offshore renewable energy, and have recently set up a Strategic Renewables Unit, or SRU, within the MMO. The SRU will work across and be a shared resource between the MMO planning and licensing teams. This team will help to address medium to long-term priorities for marine planning in the context of government ambition for net zero, green recovery, and associated policy development. So we are now in the next phase of marine planning development and will be focusing on how to take our policies forward. After the latest East report, it has been decided that the East plan needs to be updated, which we'll be working on in the coming months. For the SMP refresh, we are engaging on a national level through our lead planning contacts with the EA. We provided a response to the draft supplementary guidance for SMP refresh earlier this year, and will be continuing to work with them from now on through regular engagement at a national level, hopefully on a regional level as well. Although the SMPs are non-statutory management plans, the MMO are keen to provide guidance and advice to help ensure the revised SMPs are marine-proofed, and that is compliant or complementary with marine plans under Section 58.3 of MACA. And we will continue to engage with yourselves and other marine plan users and stakeholders to enable us to review plan use and recognise improvements where required. Finally, we have local planners in each marine plan area, and the contact details for these planners are provided here. Our planning inbox address is also provided here for general marine plan inquiries. Please do reach out for any questions you may have. Please, thank you for listening, and if there's any time, I'm happy to take some questions. If not, please reach out. I can get back to you away from the meeting. I'll pop my email address. Oh, sorry, someone's at the door. My email address in the chat after this. Thank you very much.
Did it the first time. That's money into WaterAid. I forgot to go off mute. Thank you very much, Lucinda. That was perfect. I've just got one question really, and that is, I put it in the chat. And how do we get somebody at a regional level involved in the SMPR? It's something that we do need to be doing. We're at the beginning of the process, but it will be good to tie you in early. We've been trying desperately to get you tied in at a national level, which has now been done. But we really want you at a regional level. So I think the contacts you gave me, maybe the first point of call, I put that in the chat before I actually saw those. So maybe that's where I'll start as a starter.
Yeah, definitely. Reach out to the local planner, and I'll put my email address in there as well, and I can get you in contact with people as well. Okay,
thank you very much. Moving on, we're bang on time, which is really good. It's now time for free software packages to view and analyze CCO monitoring data across the board really, and tools, and that's going to be down to Adam Baker Gooderson. So Adam, over to you.
Hello, as you said, my name is Adam Baker Gooderson. I am a coastal process technician at Canterbury City Council. And today I'm talking to you about the free software packages to view and analyze CCO monitoring data specifically QGIS, Sands-Free, Bentley View, and CoastalTools. So first of all, it's worth mentioning that software licenses are expensive, often running into the hundreds or thousands of pounds. And this is obviously a clear barrier to some groups of people, such as students, consultants, contractors, and local authorities that might be interested in exploring topographic data sets more thoroughly, but don't have the financial resources to do so. So the following free software packages that I'll get into in a moment will enable any interested parties to conduct their own analyses and projects. This would be particularly useful for students, for example, that might like to produce dissertations using the data that's freely available from CCO. Although I will mention that other software is available, and this is just a snapshot of 4 of the many pieces of software available. So first of all, I just wanted to give an introduction as to the types of data that we collect and analyze and the methods that are used. And this is mainly for the benefit of those that aren't so involved with the surveying side of the coastal monitoring program. So these are profiling, continuous, and laser scanning. The first of these methods is profiling, which is probably the most basic of the 3 methods. And this involves a surveyor with a pole and a GPS staking out 2 set lines along our frontages. And then they will take points at regular 5-meter intervals along the line or wherever there's any features, such as the top of the beach, the end of the beach, and the foreshore and crests and troughs. And by doing this and staking out to the same lines each spring and autumn, it provides a very comparable way of seeing how the beach is changing over time for these specific profiles. And in this case, is pictured is Swale Cliff, some of the profiles, and you can see the graph below representing a nice cross-sectional area of that profile. The second method is continuous, and this is probably the most physically demanding of the 3 survey methods, and it involves a much more thorough collection of 5-meter spacing across the entire frontage, wherever can be walked or quadded, but also wherever there's beach features. And by doing this, we can build up a very thorough picture of the beach. And these points are then turned into a digital ground model through irregular triangular network interpolation. And this creates a DGM which can then be directly compared to previous survey seasons. And pictured in the top center is a difference model showing how changes in the beach occur between seasons. And in the bottom right is one of our surveyors, Debbie, with a GPS fitted to the rucksack. So the third method is laser scanning. And we don't do this so much in our case, but I know there's a lot of teams out there that use it very regularly. And this involves placing the laser scanner at strategic points along the coastline to build up a geo-reference complete 3D point cloud of the frontage. And we do this at some of our steeper sites, such as Fairlight Cove or Bishopstone. And so with that out of the way, I'll now get into the 4 different pieces of software that I'm looking at. So the first of these is QGIS, and this is a free and open source geographic information system. It has very similar functionality to the popular paid GIS software that many of you might have heard of, such as ArcGIS and MapInfo. But one of the key benefits of QGIS compared to those 2 is that it runs on all common operating systems, specifically Windows, Mac, Android, and Linux. So this is a clear advantage. For example, students that might not have a Windows operating system, this is a clear benefit to them. So once installed, QGIS can be used to view, create, edit, and export geospatial data. There's plenty of vector, raster, and database formats and functionalities. And you can then use those tools to create digital ground models and difference models, as I previously showed. The only limitations of QGIS is that I'd say compared to some other GIS software, it's quite complex to get your head around and requires plenty of time to learn all the tools available and quite a bit of trial and error. So pictured here is a screenshot of some of our Whitstable topographic data loaded into QGIS. And as you can see, there's a plethora of tools available at our disposal. And that data can then be turned into a DGM through triangular irregular network interpolation. And at that point, you can run zonal statistics tools to calculate volumetric beach changes within defined polygons. And then you can use that to directly compare the data with previous survey seasons and see exactly how, in this case, Whitstable Beach is changing. And also, if anyone wants a tutorial of creating difference models within QGIS, then we have that available if you'd like to contact us. And so the next piece of software that I'd like to talk about is SANS Free. And this is produced by Jacobs. It's a free version of the SANS asset management system software that many of you might be familiar with. This software is particularly useful for storing and analyzing topographic profile data. More specifically, it can be used to display cross-sectional areas of beach profiles. And when you load in a master profile, it is then possible to calculate CSA values of the profiles across survey seasons. You can also load in trigger levels and plot long-term trends. And it has the ability to use time series data to produce wave roses. There's also the ability to visualize the data in a map known as the SANS Interactive Map. And overall, there's much the same functionalities as the full version. The only drawback is that you're limited on the amount of data that you can put into the SANS Free version. Specifically 10 locations max, whether those be profiles, wave stations, assets, or buildings, and a maximum of 5,000 time series records linked to each of those locations, whether that be wave and water level data. So depending on your frequency of your data, that might not be that long of a window. It's still useful to know. And there's also a maximum of 50 diary entries, such as asset inspections with photos, a maximum of 5 additional GIS layers, and all this stored within a single database. So pictured here is a cross-sectional area of one of our profiles at Folkestone, with the data added in and the master profile also added in. So allowing you to see how the volume, well, no, more specifically, the area is changing over time and see long-term trends. You can also add in design, maintenance, and critical values, as I previously said, and that can show you how secure the beach is and how stable it is, essentially. You can also create wave roses, as I previously mentioned, using data freely available from CCO. So the third piece of software that I'd like to talk about is Bentley View, and this has many capabilities as an AutoCAD reader with support for over 50 file formats. Although in this case, we are more interested in its ability to display and query 3D point clouds. Within the program, you can measure distances and areas, and there's plenty of labeling and fencing tools to explore your 3D point cloud. The limitations are that it is view-only software, so you can't actually do any editing of the point clouds. And I would also say that from my testing of it, it requires a fairly powerful computer to run smoothly. But once you've loaded in the data, like this is an example of a scan we did at Bishopstone to see if there's any landslips, and you can view the data from different angles, and there are various labeling and selecting tools available at your disposal. The final one that I'd like to talk about is QoastalTools, and this has the capabilities of, well, no, sorry. This is developed by the University of Southampton, and it is written in MATLAB. This software enables you to load, manipulate, analyze, and plot waves, tide, and beach profile data of the sort held by CCO or British Oceanographic Data Centre. The loaded data is then used to examine wave parameters such as longshore drift, changes in beach volume, and vulnerability index models for a series of simple algorithms. A disadvantage is that this particular tool requires MATLAB, which is licensed software, However, it is possible to get a 30-day free trial of MATLAB. Thank you for listening, and if you'd like to contact me, my email address is below. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That was brilliant. You brought it in bang on time. And I'm not going to waste anyone's time now. We're on the last leg of this morning's session, and we're the run up to lunch. And I'd like to invite Clive Neil and Christine Sams to present, but I think Christine is actually going to do the presentation. And that's going to be on intertidal topography from space, collaborating with the research community to develop practical solutions. So over to you, Christine.
Thank you very much, Brian. Can you see my slides, folks?
Yes, I can.
So yes, you've got me talking, but also online we've got Paul Bell and Clive Neil. So Paul's really the intellectual driver behind what I'm going to present today. And Clive is really the person that's done most of the work. So Clive's the hands-on, got the Python skills, the programming skills and the satellite knowledge. So I'm just the person that runs around talking to folks and trying to get funding to take this sort of research forward, work out, where it can really be applied. I also wanted to acknowledge Stephen Carpenter. He's been a core part of the team, and Kai Bird. So the work presented here, Kai worked on when he was at NOC doing a PhD with Paul, and he continues to do so with Marlan. So, right, I'm going to show you some work in progress, dangerously, and see if I can do it justice. I can't even start the slides. Let's start there. Yes, here we go. Right, so a little bit of context. So at the NOC, we do a lot of work with Earth observation right across all the research groups. But we also have a specialist team, which I manage, who work right across the kind of value chain of Earth observation. So we've got folks working on new missions, new candidate missions, E11, Hydro, GNSS, are two of the ones that we're heavily involved with at the moment, leading. We also kind of then work right through, so, looking at how do we get better information out of existing satellite signals, developing new algorithms, that sort of work, calibration and validation activities. And then we work, on some product aspects, a lot of our stuff with ESA, so we're involved with several of the climate change initiative projects. And then right down to the kind of downstream bit. So we also work, particularly my research is on finding new applications for the data that we generate and others generate. So the work I'm going to present at the moment is being funded through the Blue Co project. This is another ESA project, and it's really focused on the Atlantic region. I suppose my point here is it's quite a small project, right? There's 4 partners. It's only 150k euros, and we're about halfway through it at the moment. Our role is to deliver 2 case studies. So the work we're doing, the CCO, is half of that. And then we're also working up in Orkney with EMEC to look at how do we use Earth observation to support the renewable energy sector. I'm going to go fast or slow, let's see. So, and I've come, I suppose, again, more context. The most of my work for the past 3 years has been global. So I've been leading a project called Earth Observation for Sustainable Development, which is a consortium of 6 partners across Europe, providing a range of Earth observation services in support of international development projects. So World Bank is our main partner, and we've been doing lots of bits of work all over the place, mainly in West Africa, actually, where the most traction's been had. And I suppose from that side, it's really clear what the value is of Earth observation in lots of these cases. If there isn't enough observations, something's better than nothing often. But it's really tricky working overseas all the time, and it's been very hard to get useful validation data and to get, dynamic feedback, I guess. Often we feel like we're just, feeding the black hole. So one of the questions I have, and one of the, drivers of kind of knocking on Charlie's door was to say, wouldn't it be great to do more of this stuff closer to home, right, and get some much more immediate feedback. Yeah, so this example, the image on the top right is Guinea-Bissau and the Jagos Islands. And this is just, I think it's such an interesting location for tools like intertidal mapping. So we're doing some work actually around marine spatial planning there with the World Bank. So yeah, just really exciting topic. I just wanted to highlight, I suppose, the really nice piece of work. I put the link at the bottom. You know, the first global data set around tidal flats was published in 2019 that I'm aware of, and that's shown a 16% decline since 1984. So, you know, only Earth observation is going to give us those kind of global perspectives, and the kind of tools that we're trying to develop, thinking about developing here, really lend themselves to kind of automation. So there's a big opportunity there and a big need. So yes, so Blueco came along and we ran along the corridor, banged on Charlie's door and said, you know, this is something we could do here with you guys. And I know that there's a lot of work being done on Earth observation. We are very not new to the party here. You know, there's studies that have been ongoing and there's other work people are doing. So we just wanted to see whether any of the stuff we're doing is relevant to coastal monitoring here. So we really, you know, the goals were really build on previous work, don't duplicate effort, don't make the same kind of hit the same barriers that have been hit before in terms of using Earth observation data here. So we've been working with Earth Observation Working Group, which has been brilliant. And I want to say thank you to all the guys that have engaged with us through that, because, yeah, it's just, I think it's a really great example of, you know, I learn every time, knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange. It's just, I learn every time I speak to everyone. And I suppose the focus of our project is very much on open access data. So it's ESA funded, you know, and we found that, especially in the global stuff, we can do a lot with open access data sets. They're not fully exploited yet. So through a variety of discussions and thinking, we ended up deciding to focus on intertidal topography. I think that hadn't been picked up in previous studies that we've seen. It's a very much an active research topic at NOC, good fit with our capabilities, and yeah, it's novel what we're doing. The image on the right, just to explain, is kind of some of the ideas we had when we first were engaging the CCO around what the opportunity really is for Earth observation. So this is kind of where it all started. So Paul's been leading this kind of research for more than 15 years now. I usually say 15 years, but I think it's nearly 20, Paul. And this, so that you're looking at the Dee estuary here, so up in Merseyside, and you're looking, the yellow arrow is pointing at Hilbury Island. So that's I'm sure you all know, but anyway, you can get out there when it's low water. So Paul had this experimental radar put up in the early 2000s when there was a ranger on site who could make sure it had power and worked. And he ran it there for nearly 10 years, something like that. Sorry, I'm looking at Paul, you can jump in if you want to. And, you know, down on the, so this site was chosen because it was local, but also it's got really super dynamic sediment movement and a really high tidal range. So it's a really interesting area to try and test this technology. So the image on the bottom left is shows you what you can capture with X-band radar. And you can see really clearly there the movements going on. Yeah, okay, so that work has continued and does continue. So Paul's got patents off the back of it. He's continued to work with University of Liverpool, with Marlan, and through several projects that is now, Marlan now provide a commercial service using the algorithms that Paul developed. So it's an ongoing, and he's still involved with Marlan very much, and you guys probably know very well what they do, so I won't dwell on it. So past couple of years we've been playing, we've been experimenting with whether Paul's techniques can be adapted to use synthetic aperture radar, so satellite SAR data. And it was really driven by that, you know, international need. So where there's no, you know, where they're finding it really hard to look at sea level projections or to do ocean modelling or really understand what's going on at the coast, we need these kind of solutions. So the Accord project is a big research project that we've been involved in, and that was working in Bangladesh. So we've done a few kind of experiments in different parts of the world, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Myanmar, but always kind of struggled with the validation side of things. yeah, so what you're seeing here is on the left is a LiDAR survey. On the right, you've got an output, an early output from the Earth observation technique. So you can see, you know, some definite similarities there, and probably up the estuary, some places where you're getting some pretty suspect results, but very promising, we thought. We still do. So here's some animated images. So we can see here, this is again is the D estuary. You're looking at bottom right is the SAR images we pick up, and above that you're seeing the output from the processor. So again, this is early work. It would look slightly differently if we reprocessed now, but you can really see that the movement that's being picked up. I should probably leave it for a minute. I'm probably skipping fast, but I'm going to keep going. So how does it work? So let's see if I can explain this. So this is the core of how the thing actually works. So what happens is, for every pixel in an image, we assume it's going to be either wet or dry, and we assume that that pattern is associated with the tide. We then generate a synthetic time series, we call it, and that's where for every single pixel we calculate every single possible state of the tide that could fit that pixel. We then take the SAR data, so the backscatter intensity that we're getting on the radar, and then we compare the synthetic time series with the actual data that we're getting back, and we do a correlation. And where that fits best, that's the output. That's the elevation we assign to that pixel. There you go. No one's jumping up and down. And this is what it looks like in terms of the processing chain that we apply. So yeah, we're pulling satellite data from Copernicus, which has got a 2 to 3 repeat rate in the UK, changes with latitude. We then pull in sea level data. At the moment, we're working with tide gauge data around the UK. We know, and we're assuming a flat tide. So wherever we're mapping, we take the nearest tide gauge and we assume it's the same height. So we know that that's a ridiculous oversimplification, and we know that it breaks down up estuaries and, you know, around complex bits of coastline. So we know it's not sufficient. It's a definite topic for development. That's the process at the moment, and it does work in some places. So we plug those things into the processor, and we produce these maps. The highest resolution we can get is around 6.5 meters in the UK. Obviously, we can do much coarser. So, and the idea is, when we get it working, we can do much bigger areas potentially, or you know, easily repeat. And it makes a lovely picture. But the challenge that the group have given us, of course, is it any use? What's it actually showing us? So we've been working on validation. This is kind of pretty recent work, so it's moving all the time. But we could play a few games here, couldn't we? We could play guess the harbour, and we could play guess the survey method, but we won't. So this is Portsmouth Harbour. We chose Portsmouth because it has a tide gauge inside it. Bottom right of the image, it's not actually shown, but it's down there. And then we have LiDAR surveys available for 2016, 2018 and 2020. So that was the rationale for starting with Portsmouth, or sticking with Portsmouth for a while. So on the left you can see the LiDAR, on the right you can see the output from the waterline processor. There's differences. There's always going to be differences because they're not the same. They're not the same, right? One is a snapshot in time, and one is a blurred image, right? Taken over. So the one on the right is actually a 3-month composite. But there you go. So that's it. That's what it looks like. And this is comparing the two. We get a mean average error of 22 centimeters. Standard deviation of 41 centimeters, and a root mean square error of 41 centimeters. So for us, and this is the distribution of those errors. So, you know, this is on par. There's a few research groups working on this around the world. There's some Norwegians, some French, and some Portuguese that we're aware of. And these results are very much in line with kind of the best of those. So, you know, we're pleased. 2020 looks good. for a starting point in terms of validation. We then looked at 2018, and I think you can see immediately on inspection that it's not as good. We struggled with 2018 to get good results out. There's a few features. I mean, you can see in the channel there's something going on there, you know, and it's just definitely not as good. So we scratched our heads a little bit with this. Realised that 2018 was actually a really stormy year. So there was 3 named storms came through, I think, in December, January. So actually just before this window. So we shifted our window a little bit. And then in March, there was the beast from the east, and a named storm right at the beginning, end of March, beginning of April. So there were really unusually high sea levels in 2018. And we think that that's something to do with what's happening here. Our investigation is ongoing, but you can see here, so here's the numbers, which are a lot worse than 2020, and the spread of error, and you can really see those outliers at the bottom. So we've been playing around with post-processing, right? How do we clean this up? What's going on? What can we do to improve the results? And if I get there, so, and actually we can improve it quite a lot by doing things like, so the clutter in the channel. So sorry, what you're looking at here, LiDAR on the left, the waterline map from the previous slide, and then this cleaned up one, if you like, on the right. And what we've done is we've done things like cut out. So in the middle, you can see the clutter in the channel, and that's actually reflections from boats, moored up boats. So they're skewing us. There's a few other bits and pieces going on, which we're investigating. So you can see that even doing that, though, we're getting a lot better results, more in line with 2020. And I'm sure the question's going to come, what have we cut out? So this shows you those outlying errors that are circled are highlighted in a beautiful fuchsia pink on the left. So basically, Clive's cleaned them, and that's the result that we then end up with. There's another, what we haven't yet, what we want to do now is then kind of see, is the waterline method mapping the same sort of change in the same places as the LiDAR survey is? And we haven't done that yet because we're still kind of working on this 2018 data set. So where we are at the moment, so we know that we need to keep digging. The more we dig, the more we find. And the more we present and talk to people, the more ideas we get and the more points people come up with, which has been really useful. So, you know, we don't really know how much surface conditions impact results. You know, the wind, you know, squally rain and high wind, you know, impacts the surface signal, so it changes the backscatter. So, you know, you potentially take those out to improve some of them. Yeah, so you could potentially do some pre-post processing to really focus on the best images. And we don't know how vegetation impacts the results. We don't know if pools of standing water, how that will have an impact. And we know that things like vessels in the water do impact the results. So there's a bunch of questions there. You know, we found a kind of sweet spot, which is around 4 months of data. I've shown you 3 and I've shown you 6, but around 4 seems to be the sweet spot. But, you know, we don't really know how that, you know, sweet spot might move depending on location. So if you've got a very dynamic area, do you need to, how does that change? You know, can we, it's so context dependent, I think, how good the results we get. You know, how do we make sure that the process is robust? You know, it's scalable, it's efficient computationally, so there's things we can do there. And then on the output side, how on earth do we present the information so that we reduce the risk of it being misused or misinterpreted? I think that's a very valid criticism of Earth observation data. And then this sea level piece, we know that that's yeah, a really interesting and challenging topic, right? How on earth do we find the best solutions to get the best water levels up the channel and around the coast where there's no tide gauges? So I'm nearly there, folks. So we're about halfway through the project. We've got a lot more questions than we started with. We've learned a few things. So yeah, the sweet spot of around 4 months needed. We know we need to work on the sea level inputs. You know, maybe we can be smarter. Some ideas that Uwe gave us recently about how we construct that synthetic time series. You know, and what's really going on in the harder years. I haven't shown you 2016 actually, and that's just because I didn't want to bore you all senseless. But you know, in the early stages of the so Sentinel-1 was launched in 2015, I think. So in the early days of that, there were not a lot of images available actually. So those results are not as good. So yeah, there's lots of things to consider, and we can definitely make gains in pre and post processing. It's just a matter of time and effort. So in the short term, we need to do more work around sea levels, run some experiments, poke some things, do some maths. We want to integrate some hybrid kind of products. So FES, if you know that, is a data set that's generated by altimetry, and I think it's with some modelling included as well. And PolPred, so tidal product from NOC. So, you know, how can we integrate those as an alternative and how do they perform? We've got questions about whether there's some sort of calibration step that we could put into here. Very much an open question. Not really thought about a lot, but yeah, a thing. And that whole point about how we present results and make sure we QA, QC, we understand the limitations and we explain them properly. And it just gets more interesting. That's the, you know, the more I dig, yeah, I'm getting sucked in. You know, there's lots of future possibilities. So there's complementary, you know, satellites are going up all the time. So the SWAT mission, surface, I can't remember the name of it anyway. So the SWAT mission, you can see at bottom right, that's being launched in 2022. Paul is actually leading a calibration and validation project for the UK involving Bristol University and Bangor. And this is going to give us really high resolution snapshots of water levels. So it'll act as a ground truth. It could definitely complement the work that we're doing. And it really gives us a sense, you know, if we start to try and implement some modelling solutions and some hybrid solutions, it'll give us a feedback into that could make that stronger. So we can think of lots of opportunities around SWAT with this work. Sentinel-6 is another satellite that's flying now, recently launched-ish, which ESA tell me are getting brilliant results from that were unexpected, and we've not even scratched the surface of what that can do for us. So yeah, plenty of directions for investigation. And the other thing that we're doing a lot of at the moment is GNSS-IR, which is reflected GPS signals. So Paul's been buying cheap GPS receivers from Amazon or other retailers. You know, and we can stick them on. So we've put the images on the left are from the RNLI station in Sligo, West Ireland. And we stuck it up there on that, whatever it's called, lattice structure. And he's been measuring water levels and actually finding out that the tide gauge was miscalibrated, giving us brilliant results just for, you know, very, very low cost. So we're really excited about what we're doing with that. And we're shoving them out all over the place, all over the world. I think there's one going in the Caribbean at the moment. Yeah, and we're also using those to measure sea state as well. So all these things, we're really interested in how on earth we pull these things together and really kind of change the game in terms of monitoring. That's it. There's our emails. I just want to say thank you again to the EO working group that have engaged with us. Like really appreciate your input and time, and hope we can do more. There you go.
Christine, thank you very much. I mean, just saying that's it is just a bit of an understatement, to be quite honest. It was a brilliant presentation, and to be quite honest, I wish I was more intelligent to really understand most of it, but it was very interesting, and I'm sure the clever people on the screen in front of me will be able to make use of the work that you're doing there. Thank you very much. And with that, I think really there are some questions that are going through coming through on the chat, so if you'd like to look in there to see if you can answer those. It looks like John Cocker's saying a good presentation as well. So a fellow coastal chair is also complimenting you on your presentation. So well done. I think we're almost at the end of today's session. Somewhere Poppy put in the chat the email address to link to her to see so you can actually connect into the next session. And I'm just going to ask Charlie if we're going to be able to capture all these questions and make some sense of them at the end of the day. Just the nod will be good, Charlie.
Yeah, we'll be recording
That's,
all the questions and answers, and we can circulate them to everyone.
That's brilliant. Really, it's. I'd like to thank all the presenters again for their sessions this morning and the time that they invested in putting the presentations together. They were all excellent presentations. I'd also like to thank you for putting the human element, your actual delivery of them to us as well, because that makes the whole thing more animated and brings the whole thing together for us all. And above all, thank you for keeping to time. We're now 4 minutes away from the allotted time that we said we would finish, and we could, if we're lucky, go and get an early lunch. It will be a very slight increase on lunchtime, but our intention is to resume with the afternoon sessions at 3:30, so it's not long. So with that, I'm assuming you've got nothing else to add, Charlie?
No, just if you're not signed up for a workshop and you'd like to be, Poppy's just shared her details again, so you can just get in touch with her. She'll forward you on the invite to the workshops this afternoon. Okay.
And with that, I will officially close down. Oh, wait a minute. Before I do that, David, you got your hand up.
Brian, I thought we were meeting again at 1:30, not 3:30.
1:30. What did I say? 3:30?
Yeah, you did.
No, 1:30. You're dead right,
good.
David.
That's
Keep
all right.
me in check. Thank you.
Finished at 3:30. All right. Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much, everyone. And with that, I will close down with 3 minutes to go. How about that? Brilliant job for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.